ATC family, my name is Jess Fuller. I'm David's daughter, and first of all, I'd like to say Happy Father's Day to any dads out there. I personally think that I grew up with the best dad ever. So I remember when I must have been about 15, my dad and mom sat my brothers and I down at the table to kind of present the idea of answering the call to us, and they laid the whole thing out, the whole vision, which included at the time the training center in Costa Rica and, you know, the 1040 window and wanting to work. There was a statistic about, you know, so many percentage of the world's most unreached people lived inside that latitude and longitude window, and only a certain very small percentage of missionary activity took place there. So I remember having this whole thing laid out to us, and it just changed the course of my family forever. But missions has always been a part of my dad and who he is, and because of that, my brothers and I really got to experience so much growing up. So the first trip he ever took me on was when I was 9, and we went to Africa for 3 weeks, and I'm still amazed that my mom let that happen. But we went to Africa for 3 weeks, and I fell in love with Africa, and I think obviously he did too. But one of my better memories of being on the field with him was being in Sudan South Sudan when I was in 7th grade. And I remember while I was gone, this very distinct memory of some classmates of mine had gotten suspended for blowing up a muffin in the microwave at school, and I, you know, was being exposed to having to sit in a bomb shelter because the Antonov was coming, and my dad was always just at like the front of the action because he really had a heart to capture what was going on over there and bring it home to raise awareness. And so I remember specifically on that trip traveling to different garrisons where he would preach to the soldiers right before they would go out, and it was unlike any kind of military obviously that exists in the United States, but I remember being so little, and there's all these soldiers, and some of them didn't have limbs, and they had ratty t-shirts, but every time we would show up at a garrison, my dad would just stand there. It's like he just commanded, I don't know, the presence of God was just there, and it would be this little white man with all these African soldiers, and he would get them hyped up every time, just talking about the love of Jesus. And I just really, really specifically remember that about that trip. But growing up with my dad was just such a privilege, and he is the kindest man. He's got the biggest heart. He's your biggest cheerleader. He's adventurous, and he really taught all of his kids to love that, and I'm so grateful that he is who he is, and that God gifted me with him as my dad. And Daddy, I love you. Happy Father's Day, and I look forward to many more days of celebrating you. Love you.
Papa Dave, happy Father's Day. When Liz and Nicole asked us to put together this video, I was going through like all the different memories that I could have chosen from all the different adventures that we've had. I mean, you know, being 9 years old and being taken to Hong Kong and the Philippines, and, you know, the guy that walked like 2 days to get me a hamburger from McDonald's up in Luwag. You know, we could talk about all of our Ukraine adventures, Sudan, Middle East adventures, Western Europe. I mean, we've done so many different things, but the one memory I think that made me that I remember that like really stood out was our Yemen trip. And I can't remember what year it was, but we had it was the trip where we got the bicycles and rode from Sana'a to Aden, which would be, I don't know, I think it was like something like we rode like 400 miles ish over like 10 days or 7 days, something like that. And on that trip, we were I think we were about 3/4 of the way through in a town near Zabid, if I remember correctly. And we were in this, like compound hotel thing, and we had eaten swordfish that night or something. And man, I just remember like we had no AC. It was like in the desert. It was so hot. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night and getting so sick, throwing up. I had like hives all over me. And I remember that it wasn't just like a physical sickness. It was like I was encountering some spiritual warfare because the place that we were staying in felt so incredibly dark. And I could not sleep. So I was like outside walking around the compound at like 3 a.m. Stayed up all night, throwing up and just walking around and feeling really scared. And I remember when I saw you in the morning, I kind of grabbed you and we had kind of talked about like what was going on. And you were telling me that you understood exactly. You were like, I think what you're talking about, some spiritual warfare. And I remember, and you were then proceeded to tell me about a time that you experienced something very similar in Sudan. And I just remember feeling like super comforted and taken care of in that moment. I think knowing that you had experienced something similar and you were there to share that with me and tell me that like I wasn't going crazy or something, just made me feel really protected as your son. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. And then also like that whole trip was incredible. I mean, I think one thing I think about you with respect to traveling and stuff is that like you full immersion, you know, it wasn't like we were gonna fly into Sanaa and spend a couple of days there and fly home. It was like, let's get some bicycles and ride all the way across the country. Let's see the country on foot or on a bicycle. And so we were able to see Haja and Taiz and go to different weddings on the side of the road, drink tea with strangers, get caught in a sandstorm between, I can't even remember, it was Zabid and Aden, somewhere there. You know, and then we finally make it to Aden, and so Treddy got baptized, which is really cool too. And I don't know, it's just something that's, I think, carries on with me for, you know, all the adventures that Kayla and I go on, and then also like in the future, like all my kids, is that there is this like full immersion mentality of like, I'm going to go have an experience. And I'm just super thankful for that. So anyways, just wanted to tell you I love you. Happy Father's Day, and you the man.
My story about my dad in the field was when I was 9 years old. We had a family tradition that each Fuller kid would go on their first mission trip. So I got to go to East Congo. And at the end of East Congo, me and my dad, we were in Kenya at the game park. And I remember after a long day of safari rides and stuff, I was in bed and I found this stick. It was like a foot long, but it had these massive thorns on it. And they were all over the stick. I was laying in bed and I was twirling it. And I asked my dad, like, if I was in a crisis or something, like if I was about to get eaten by an alligator or something, would you grab onto this stick to save me? And he said, yeah, of course. Like, he didn't even think about it. And I remember as a 9-year-old thinking like, wow, like I can't imagine having that much love for someone. But I knew when he said that, like, my dad had that love for me. And I've always carried that with me, even as just like what the Father's love looks like for us, you know? Like, he was willing to do anything and take any hardship for us. So today, on Father's Day, I'm thankful and grateful to have a dad that would do anything for me. Love you, Dad.